Hello, welcome to Workplace Wake Up. I'm Jen Shaw. Every week, I spend about 15 minutes covering key legal developments, introducing you to interesting guests, and providing some entertainment to start your workday. I hope you enjoyed this week's episode. We're going to talk about a tough topic. We're going to talk about workplace violence. And there are a couple of different reasons for that. First of all, we are in a situation in this country where, regardless of your political views or your First Amendment or Second Amendment views or whatever they may be, we got a lot of shooting, a lot of gun violence in this country. And I don't pretend to have the answer for it, but it really is important for you to understand as HR professionals, because every time there is a mass shooting, I shouldn't say every time, but just about every time, it happens at somebody's workplace, right? So these school shootings, yes, they're happening at schools to students, which is absolutely horrible. Teachers and administrators are also getting killed. That is their workplace. So I want to talk to you a little bit about what is going on in terms of workplace violence prevention. And we're going to talk a little bit about a law here in California, Senate Bill 553, which we've mentioned in a few other podcasts just briefly, that became effective this year, this summer actually. And the idea of it is that we needed to make sure by July 1, 2024, that all California employers have in place a workplace violence prevention program. All right. And the idea of this is that you have a plan, you have a strategy of what's going to happen in your organization if there is a violent incident, what you're going to do to prevent violent incidents. And the really interesting sort of aspect of this law is that they use the word effective all over the place. It has to be an effective program. You have to have effective training. You have to have an effective policy. But it's not defined anywhere. There may be some more regulations that are going to come out that will be issued by Cal OSHA. The federal OSHA folks may come out with something. But SB 553 is really one of the most comprehensive violence prevention laws that we have in this country. And it's very interesting because it came about as a result of an incident back in 2021 that was horrible. Some of you remember it in San Jose, California, at the Valley Transportation Authority Railroad. And there was a horrible shooting there. And a lot of the politicians got together and said, look, we've got to be doing something. So they tasked Cal OSHA with getting some things in order. And then eventually SB 553 came on board, and it made it out of committees, and it was approved and sent to the governor's desk, where he signed it immediately. So the idea that I want you to get from this podcast this morning is the rationale for SB 553 is that there is more workplace violence going on. Okay, there are more things happening. And if that's the case, if we are in a time of heightened risk, right, we need to do more internally. We need to make sure that we're not just checking a box that we have a workplace violence prevention program. By the way, some of you called our office on June 28th, right? The law became effective July 1. You had to have a plan in place July 1 and said, oh, could you just send me a template? It's not what it is, right? You have to tailor your workplace violence prevention program to meet all of the potential risks in your workplace. And if you have 7 different environments, you have a rail yard, for example, and you have trains, and you have an admin office, and you have a dispatch office. You may have different things in each of those locations. So the idea is that Cal OSHA, after SB 553, is supposed to develop what they're calling the Workplace Violence General Industry Plan. And they've been working on this for decades, to be honest. But now the plan is supposed to be adopted no later than December 31st, 2026. And SB 553 put that deadline in place so we could move the ball, right? The fact of the matter is, political and workplace violence in this country, according to many, many statistics, is at its highest point since the mid-1970s. And we've already seen a ton of violence this year, including 2 assassination attempts of former President Trump. Now, again, regardless of your political views, from my perspective, that's not how our country is supposed to work, right? We're supposed to be able to go to the polls and vote for who we want to vote for. The truth of the matter is things have become much more complicated when it comes to workplace violence prevention. In California, there has been a requirement for a long time that we have an injury and illness prevention plan, an IIPP. Your workplace violence prevention program can be part of your IIPP, but you've got to make it tailored to the workplace. You have to do training that is not off-the-shelf training, that is training tailored to your workplace. There's a lot going on here. There are documents you have to maintain. The violent incident log, for example. There's just a lot of things that have to happen. Now, one of the things to recognize about workplace violence prevention is you have to know your workplace, right? So there are various types of workplace violence that are described by Cal OSHA. There's what they call type 1, which is criminal intent. And this is when somebody has no legitimate reason to be at the workplace, but they decide to rob the drugstore, for example. There's type 2, which is perpetrated by a customer or a client. They obviously do have a connection to the workplace. It can also be perpetrated by visitors or by students, for example. Type 3 is what we call worker-on-worker violence, where this is usually a former employee or supervisor or manager who is coming back to the workplace to perpetrate violence. Not always. It's not always a former, but frequently it is. And then type 4 is violence that is perpetrated by someone who has a personal relationship with someone in the workplace. So this is where domestic violence spillover becomes so prevalent, that you have things going on at an employee's home, and then it might be that the employee files a temporary restraining order, tries to get some sort of an injunction to preclude that individual, her partner or his partner or spouse, for example, from contacting the employee, also from coming to the workplace. But, you know, an injunction, a temporary restraining order is a piece of paper. So what I want you to think about with respect to violence prevention is not just that you need to check the box on SB 553 compliance. You do. And if you're listening to us from another state or another country, you should do it. You should go look at California's program and you should copy it, because you know what? It's pretty darn good. I mean, I have to say that this isn't always the case when there's a government program that rolls out. But I think they did a pretty good job setting it up, figuring out what documents to create, what documents to add. I just feel like they've done a good job. There are problems with SB 553. You know, they don't define hazards very well in the law. You know, hazard could be circumventing some security measure, like propping open a door, for example, when somebody goes out to get something from their car. There's so many different things that can come up. But the workplace violence prevention program, okay, includes a workplace violence prevention plan. And this has confused people, right? The program is the big picture, the big umbrella, which includes the plan, the training, the policies, okay? But the actual plan has a number of very specific requirements, all of which have to be reviewed annually. And even if it hasn't been a year, when there's a new hazard or a new problem that has been identified. The other thing about the workplace violence prevention plan is that you have to get employee input. You have to be sure that you understand from your employees, what do they perceive to be a potential threat to them? Where do they feel like their safety may be threatened or may be at risk? So the California Department of Industrial Relations has a model workplace violence prevention plan that you can use. It's a good starting point. But again, you do have to customize it to address all of your specific workplace requirements. And just rolling out the basic template is not going to fulfill your regulatory requirements. The other thing to remember is this is a living document. This is not something that is one and done, where you're just going to issue the plan and be done. Some organizations are going to need multiple plans, like we've talked about, right? Because you have different environments, different employees. And the training is not just off the shelf canned training. The training has to be appropriate for the workplace. It has to be tailored. You have to make sure employees can get a copy of the program and the plan. You should be talking about corrective measures that the employer will take, how to address workplace violence hazards and incidents, how employees can get help, what can they do to prevent and respond to violence, how can they avoid physical harm. You know, this is one of those things. My daughter, as some of you know, just started high school, and they had on Friday the 13th of September, there were a bunch of threats throughout the country. We had several in Sacramento. One of them related to her school, and her school didn't call when they were supposed to call. So I didn't know what was going on, and there was nobody. There are very few people at school that day. And I thought, well, that's so weird. We're driving right into the parking lot. How cool is this? Like, we must be early. And we were a little bit early. But it turned out that they didn't cancel school. They just said, if you don't want to come, if you don't want to send your kid, you don't need to. My daughter was like, Mom, this is great because I'm getting a lot of extra help from the teachers. But of course, once I figured out what was going on, I was worried, and I felt like the district hadn't explained well, the school hadn't explained well. And it's one of those situations where I almost feel like we have a tendency to not want to talk about it, to not want to point it out, because we just want it to go away. Like, I can't believe here we are in October, and less than a month ago, we had another tragic, horrible school shooting. And we're going to have more. And it's just so puzzling to me, like, why we're still having these issues. What is wrong? When I was in school, a long time ago, 40 years ago, I didn't have to worry about someone shooting me. And when I picked up Ella from school the other day after this scare, she said, Mom, I had 2 tests today. I didn't have time to worry about an incident. I was like, wow, yeah, I get that. You're tired. Yeah, I'm really tired, Mom. And it was a rough weekend for her. She was really affected. So you have to protect your employees. Yes, I want you to have a workplace violence prevention program, okay? But you have to do more. You have to figure out what's going on with your employees. You have to connect with employees. You need to make sure you know what is making them tick. You need to let managers and supervisors know that if they're observing something different, they should come to HR. They should let you know what's going on. It's one of those things that the law is going to help. I mean, there are very steep potential fines, up to $160,000, $159,000 to be exact. If you have willful or repeat violations, there's all sorts of things that can come up here. But the truth is, we just have to protect our employees. We have to make sure that the workplace is as safe as it can be. These days, we can't guarantee anybody anything. But I was really getting the sense from some of the folks I talk to regularly that this SB 553 requirement was sort of, well, we'll get it in place. We'll cross it off the list. We won't worry about it. It's got to be more than that. You really have to roll out a plan. You have to understand everything that the law requires and how you're going to be able to comply with it. And if you do that, you are going to minimize workplace violence incidents. You are, because remember, we have what we call the mass workplace violence incidents where somebody brings a weapon and they harm somebody, a gun usually. But it's also workplace violence to yell at someone and berate someone. It's not illegal, but it certainly is a morale issue. It certainly is a problem in terms of retention and recruitment if you have a manager or supervisor who believes that intimidation is the best way to go, right? It's just not a practical answer to how to keep good employees and how to get good employees to come to our organizations. So I don't want anybody freaking out about this. It's nothing to worry about. It's just something to do. I want you to get your plan in place. If you let July 1 go by and you didn't do it, do it. Make sure it's in place by the end of the year at the latest. July 1 was your deadline. You need a program. So that is the plan, training, forms, policies, documentation, all of that. So go out there and get it done, you guys. It's worth it. This is a really important thing to put on your to-do list. Your employees will appreciate it. People who visit your workplace will appreciate it. And you won't wake up at night worrying that you haven't done enough. You can't guarantee somebody's safety, but we should take all reasonable steps. And when you look at Senate Bill 553, it really is driving that compliance. So thank you all so much for joining me today. Go out and have a great day, everyone. Happy fall, and I'll see you next time. Workplace Wake Up, including our guests and hosts, do not provide legal advice in this podcast. Do not act upon any of the information discussed in this podcast without first consulting a licensed attorney in your jurisdiction. If you enjoyed this episode and would like to spread the word, please share it with others, post about it on social media, and/or rate and review it. You can also follow us on LinkedIn, Twitter, and Facebook, and email us at info@shawlawgroup.com.